Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all around the world. It's fantastic to see all the different places that you're signed in from this morning here for us in Cambridge, Massachusetts. There's over 1,400 people registered for today's Innovation at Work webinar, in which I'm joined by Bill Fischer, a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management, who will be discussing with us today re-examining business model-led transformation. Bill is a long-time contributor to our executive education programs here at the MIT Sloan School. Much of his career spent primarily at IMD in Switzerland, and has been doing a lot more work with us in the last year or so, including an upcoming program on business model innovation for organizational transformation, from which Bill actually is drawing some of the thoughts and comments he's going to share with us here today. So what we will cover today are questions like what's next on the innovation frontier, and indeed what is an innovation frontier these days, particularly through the lens of organizational transformation, and if we're going to change business models, what do we have to keep in mind, and how do we make sure that organizations are fit for the new purpose that will be the consequence of, we hope, of that kind of innovation. So as noted on this slide, please feel free to ask questions through the Q&A throughout Bill's remarks. I'll come back in a few minutes and start asking some of those questions. And if you want to keep interacting with each other in the chat as well while you're going, that's also great to see. So with that, let me hand over the reins for the moment to Bill. Bill, take it away.
Thanks, Peter, and thank you, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's always a pleasure to talk about business model innovation and organizational transformation. I'm a big believer in leadership and management being about choices, and the choices that you make and the choices that you don't make. And I think that nothing is a better way to look at those than looking at the business models that characterize the organizations of which we're a part, and the way in which we have adjusted or not our organizational cultures to support those business models. So just to start off with, if I could ask you to think about your own organization and just put in the chat list, are you in organizations where business models are regarded as legitimate sources of innovation? And by legitimate sources of innovation, what I mean is, do they carry the same weight and legitimacy as technology, or are they sort of seen as second-class innovations, or maybe are they not seen at all? And if you just put some answers down there, we'll have a feeling for where you're coming from as we begin this conversation. My experience is that business model innovation is everywhere, okay? Just absolutely everywhere. This morning when I opened the Financial Times, the first thing that I saw was that Doordash, one of New York City's big food delivery services, which has really gotten us through the pandemic by bringing meals to apartments all around, not only the city, but I guess the country, but it is offering now for the first time 3 different tiers of service. So they're already into business model innovation after being an incredible business model innovation to begin with. Peloton, business model innovation. Newsletters like Media and Substack, which we're reading so much about, business model innovation. Zoom education, business model innovation. Now, doesn't mean that technology isn't involved, but if you don't take the business model piece of these changes seriously, you're really missing out on a big portion of what's going on. And I think that business model innovation is one of the reasons why disruptive innovation is so prevalent in our conversations today. Business model innovation has given organizations, insurgent organizations, outsiders, the chance to really get past what used to be impermeable barriers to entry. So they can, like, a good example is Dollar Shave Club. They don't need the engineers and scientists that Gillette and the others have had in terms of making better blades and better devices. They have a different way of delivering and a different way of pricing. Changes everything. So it's important that we all think, I think, seriously about business model innovation. I'm also a big believer when I talk about choices that we shouldn't be casual about the choices that we make. And all too often, what I see is a great deal of casualness in the way in which we regard business model innovation and organizational choice. So I'm a big fan of the business model canvas because it does several things very, very acutely. One of the things it does is it forces you to be precise. Precision is critically important, particularly in the value proposition. And that's I think, the hardest thing for managers to get right, because it requires them to articulate the voice of the customer. What are the jobs to be filled in the customer's life? And if you can get that right, then that value proposition becomes the motor which pulls all of the other activities together within the business model canvas. We get the business model canvas in a coherent form, then we have a legitimate chance to think that we have desirability, that we have feasibility, and that we have viability. And those, as Alex Osterwalder, the creator of the business model canvas, will tell you, that's the acid test of success. But I also think that and actually, before I get into it, I also think I want you to also see that one of the great things about the business model canvas is that it legitimizes innovation throughout the entire organization. So every one of these cells here, it represents a function or an activity within the organization. Most likely, everybody in an organization can position themselves in one of these cells. The other thing you see in these cells, however, is that there's well-known brands that have disrupted a well-established industry in every one of those cells. And for me, what that means is that innovation can begin anywhere in the organization. It's just not the province of technology. I say that as a lapsed engineer, but and it hurts a little bit, but I think the business model innovation is democratizing innovation. Everybody has an idea that could potentially disrupt their industry. And you can see it here with many names that we're familiar with. The other piece of this, however, that I think is so important is that if you don't change the culture, if you don't at least examine what you might do in changing the culture of your organization, then you're being a bit presumptuous, because if you feel you can change the way you go to market without necessarily changing your organization, that's chutzpah, that's hubris. So I think we have to be equally analytical in the way we think about the choices we make, not only about business models, but about our organizational culture. And in this regard, I really prefer using Jay Galbraith's STAR model. It's not a new model, and it is a sort of a condensation of the iconic McKinsey 7S model. But it says, look, you can make choices as a leader in 5 different domains: vision, skills and talent, how we organize those skills and talent, how we work together to make the vision succeed, and what are our values, metrics, and rewards, and how do they influence everything. In high-performing organizations, and those are all choices, some of them very pedestrian choices. In high-performing organizations, those choices are explicitly, consciously made to support the vision. Otherwise, why would you do it? And then the second thing, and this is often the thing that's lost in translation, is that they're mutually reinforcing. So that what we have is as long as we have a clear-cut, precise, and inspiring vision, we are building an organization that's designed to support that vision. And that vision ought to resonate with the value propositions we're taking to market. So I think it pays to be analytical, it pays to be precise, it pays to be coherent when we talk about all of these things. And these frameworks, which are readily available, are things that you ought to be looking at today in order to be able to make your business model innovation more prolific and more productive. So at this point, let me stop at this point and invite Peter back to talk about this in a more casual and conversational format.
Sure, thank you so much, Bill. That's a really good jumping off point, and we've got some questions coming in, and please do keep them. Let's maybe just to get us started, when I hear about business model innovation, one of the things that also comes to mind, especially perhaps these days, is what do we even mean? What's our philosophy of our business model in the sense of, I could take that to be, how do we make money for our investors, or how do we serve customers? From your point of view, is there a preferred philosophy of thinking about a business model?
So I think that's a great point, because business models are, normally in a classroom setting, I'll ask 40 or 50 people to tell me what the business model is for a product or a service we all know, and I'll get 70 answers, not just 40 or 50. And it's always so amazing how varied the answers would be. That I rely on the business model canvas because I think it's a good starting place. It's a concise and way to think about the choices we have to make. If you make those choices, you have a coherent story that you can tell investors or your boss or your colleagues about how we're going to make this work. And the other thing is it's inclusive. It just naturally draws in a good team conversation. So that's where I start.
Great. And a question here, actually, which I think is rather interesting, from Bogdan, asks, how do we use, how does culture show up in the business model canvas when you're using it?
So I think look, you can't separate culture out of the business model canvas, because we're talking about how we're going to go to market. We're talking about the partnerships we're going to try to engage. We're talking about how we're going to build relationships with customers. So it's there, but it's implicit. And my sense is that if you want to be successful with any choices, you need to make the implicit explicit. So what I like about the canvas, if you will, is that it forces us to say, we're going to choose to do this, or we're going to choose not to do that. And I think then if you go to the Galbraith Star, which I think is parallel, you can begin thinking about what cultural choices you might make to support those operational choices. So I think there's a natural link between the two. Could I say one other thing, Peter? I would say, don't do the culture choices before you know what you're trying to accomplish, because you might accomplish something very different than what you're hoping to accomplish. I think culture should support the business model choices.
That feeds into a question that Javier and some others are asking, actually, which one of our colleagues, Fiona Murray, talks in her programs about the difference between little I innovation and big I innovation, where the big I is, in a sense, more transformational. And I guess the question is here, in the context, as you think about business model innovation, is there also that kind of distinction, and are both equally important, sort of incremental business model innovation, if you like, versus transformational business model innovation, and where do they meet?
So I think by their nature, both business model logic and culture should start low down in the organization, probably as low as you can get, because you want to be as precise as you can get about the target market segments and about the sorts of skills and talents you need. And that means that more often than not, given the way in which you think about innovation portfolios, you're going to be talking about more small than large. But I wouldn't get engaged with any large innovation without thinking about how we're going to do this and what's it going to take within our culture to make this happen. Incidentally, I also think that as innovation accelerates and as industry S-curves get shorter, the distinction between incremental and big innovation begins to blur. And I'm not sure in the future how much longer we'll be making that distinction.
Great. John, in the chat, rather than the Q&A, was describing his situation, and I wonder how often you see this, and if you've got any advice for dealing with it. This sort of taking a very analytic approach in his organization, he fears leads to paralysis, or moving too slowly to take advantage of the opportunity for innovation, and others move in first, and then they, in his view, congratulate themselves on having avoided some particular risk from that idea. Is that something that you've seen, and do you have any advice for how to get around that?
So you have a lot of company. That's one of the things I would suggest. Yeah, because you see that all the time. The the biggest problem that we have with innovation is success, past success, and the biggest model we have with execution is our own organizations. I'm involved in a couple of writing projects right at the moment where we're looking at organizations that have gone through radical innovation or radical cultural transformation with much more autonomy in small groups and much closer to the customer. And the reason they're doing that is because the old organizations were too slow in responding. No point in getting close to the customer if you can't respond quickly and immediately and completely. And that means you probably almost always have to think about what do we have to change in our organizational culture.
So to that point, earlier in the Q&A, Gladys was asking about the question that large companies in particular often have a very established approach to developing their business strategy and hopefully to implementing it. And she's wondering, does it work to start at the team level by introducing a tool like the Canvas? Have you seen that?
So I do think so. The Canvas is an easy way to prototype, not prototype, but prototype good ideas. And prototyping is what you do before you prototype. Prototype is all about, can we do it? Prototype is, does anyone care if we can do it? So and that anyone cares might very well mean include your senior level, the people you report to. Can you get their enthusiasm and support? We actually, in the course that Peter mentioned, the last piece of the course is actually we have another Canvas which I didn't put on here, which is talking about how do you manage upwards, how do you manage sideways, and I think you begin that at time zero. So not only when you're sketching out a prototype project and business model, you also need to be thinking about what is it going to take to sell this within my own organization so that I can get the support and enthusiasm of sponsors.
Great. So what's your view, and I'm sure there could be a lot of answers to this question, but what's your view on the situation where, as may often be the case, a business model innovation from within the organization essentially threatens or cannibalizes the existing business, particularly an existing cash cow business? Yeah. What happens? Is there a better way to approach that?
So that's a really great question, because in fact what we do see is in so many of the organizations we're looking at, the earlier you can, the people who move earlier, which means almost always disrupting their own existing incumbent successful businesses, they usually are better positioned to make the jump to whatever comes next. And part of that is because they're also destabilizing their competitors at the same time with the new idea. But that's not an easy sell. And there's two prevailing arguments. One is, break them off and let them do it somewhere else and see how it works. And they don't then contaminate, if you will, the existing business culture or business model. The other one is, let's do it all together. Let's if we believe in this, let's go all in. And I would say the prevailing advice, the majority of the advice you'll get is to split them off and do it. But I think my heart is with let's all do it together. I think that makes the most sense. I think, every organization has to manage its future and its present. And the present is where all the resources come from, so they're politically most powerful. But you've got to manage the future as well, or else what's the point in having a present? I think if the future projects succeed, they're going to be the new present at some point. And you have a leadership obligation to not abandon the people who got you there in the first place, but to share the lessons learned so that they can move forward into the future as well. And so I think it means more all in rather than having separate cultures. But forgive me for being so long-winded, but I really am an advocate for multiple cultures within a single organization. As long as they have different business models, and that means different customers, different skills and talent, why wouldn't they have a different culture?
So you touched on something in that answer as well, which I think we could have a whole other webinar exploring, but the role of leadership, particularly in perhaps those situations where there are conflicting and competing businesses within the organization, whether they're competing for internal resources or competing for customers or competing for markets. So, how is leadership changing, or how does it need to change, in your view, to really enable organizations to thrive in this much more dynamic environment?
So I think you're absolutely right. I think leadership needs to be more customer experience centric rather than customer centric. I think it needs to look at how we intercept the customer journey along its entirety. And so that means technical and non-technical types of interventions, which ultimately will lead to major cultural differences within the organization. I think that as a result, leadership needs to be more experimental than it's been in the past, and faster, because the experiments aren't always going to work. I think you're going to need more expertise domains than ever before. So that means open and inclusive. I also think emotionally that you need to be more daring. And that goes back to the big I, little I types of things. I think that we need to be more daring, even in the little I types of innovations. And finally, I think radically open is increasingly necessary, because our customers' journey is changing faster than our ability to interact with the customer. And we need help from outside experts that we've never engaged before. So I think one of the missing pieces of the new leadership competencies is generosity. I think that if you're not generous with recognition and rewards, why would anybody partner with you? And so I think that what we'll see is the building of rather interesting, fascinating ecosystems. Changes the definition. Will no longer be involved in value chains which reduce variance, but we'll be building ecosystems which enlarge variance. And that really requires very different types of leadership skills.
It's interesting that you raised the question of ecosystems. We've been hearing about this idea that maybe competition in the future will be less between firms and more between ecosystems. What does that mean to you in the context of this conversation?
So I think it's very real. I've been doing a lot of work in consulting over the years with a home appliance company, which for years, decades, their customer journey has been 30 minutes every 15 years. The customer comes in, sees a refrigerator that they like, you sell it to them, and if they like it, if it works, they come back 15 years later. Now they're speaking to the customer 10 or 15 times a day, because the customer has the interactive, the hyperconnectivity ability to talk to knowledge providers through portals in their refrigerators and their laundry and washing machines and what have you. And they want to know about detergents, and they want to know about the provenance of their foods, and they want to know about recipes and food pairings. And the organization that I've worked with has never thought about these things. They've never had to think about them. So now what they're doing is they are engaging in a wide range of what you could call joint ventures or strategic alliances that involve outside experts that are new to this conversation. And so what we're seeing is the advantages of co-branding. We're seeing new ways of negotiating value creation, so that we're talking about value sharing more and more. It really changes what it means to have a brand. And I in this organization, I've been told that relationships are the most important asset that they have today, not the plant and equipment.
I think that's an important point for us always to remember, is what is the power and the value in these intangibles, and relationships, of course, are a supreme example of that. Maybe in the last few minutes, earlier on, there was a question about sustainability, and maybe I can put it together with 2 or 3 ideas that have been going on in the chat here to put it to you. Over the past year, a lot of the quote unquote transformation that we've seen and the requests that we've been receiving have been for help around digital transformation. And that, I think, clearly is tied to the way that in the pandemic, a lot of businesses have really had to shift their models to survive at all. That appears to be having some impacts on and relevance to sustainability as well. we're all traveling less. Businesses are relying much more on digital ways of doing business and less on physical ways. As you think about what you've experienced in in business transformation, business model transformation, do you think these sorts of changes are things that are here to stay and will have a benefit on issues like sustainability? Yes. Or are you already seeing that they were just stopgaps and we haven't really changed the way we think about organizing the world of commerce?
Right. So I think it's both, right, Peter? I think it's both. I think what we see is that some organizations were doing sustainability theater, other organizations were taking it quite seriously. I think we have a sustainability problem on our planet and in our species, and I think that inevitably we will all have to become more aware of what we have to do and how we could do it differently. That's going to change business models. It's going to change who we partner with. It's going to change how we go to market. It's going to change how we take our products back from the market. It's going to change the customer segments we speak to, and it's going to change the expertise that we need. So I think that's already a big business model conversation. And you do see organizations that are differentiating themselves on those models and gaining adulation, if not market share, as a result of that.
Great. And it's not, of course, when we use the word business, it's perhaps we shouldn't restrict ourselves to what we have historically thought of being as businesses. You told me the other day about an example from your new course where somebody was applying this thinking, in the not traditional business sector. If you could just perhaps close by sharing that story with us, that would be great.
Sure. Let me in an act of shameless self-promotion, let me put up the information about the course. We did this course on organizational transformation and business model innovation, organizational transformation, and we had a fairly high police official from Australia in the class, and he was wondering what about what does this mean for what's the relevance for him? But there are now business model canvases for non-business organizations, for NGOs and for government organizations. We were able to give him a very similar type of framework to what we were working with, and he could use that throughout the course to develop a non-commercial business model, which had the benefit of giving him structure and coherence. Sharing a common vocabulary and a common framework amongst the team is critically important to execute, and that's what he was looking for.
Thank you. Well, this has been fascinating, and as always, the time flies by when we're talking about these issues, Bill. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you all for joining us from all around the world. And as Bill mentioned, if you'd like to get deeper into this subject with Bill, please do visit our website, executive.mit.edu, and take a look at Bill's new course on business model innovation and transformation. And I look forward to hopefully seeing some of you on campus or on our virtual campus, as we still are, either at that course or in future webinars and LinkedIn Live events. Thank you all. It's been an honor to have you all join us, and thank you once again, Bill, and to the team at MIT Sloan Exec Ed for putting together this fascinating webinar.
Thank you so much.